Okay, so with this understanding then of what the goods must trade between, their terms of trade, and where they have the comparative advantage, economic theory alone won't tell us where in this range it must be, just that it must be in that range. So let's just presume for the moment that 1x will trade for 1.5y. Let's just say that that is the case. What does that mean for us? That means that this country, country 1, is going to produce at its extreme and then trade at that ratio. Country 2, produce all good y, and then trade some of their y's for x's. So let's say that they actually trade, the actual amount traded is 10x for 15y. That would mean that they would be at 20x, but they would actually now be at 15y. Right? Because they traded 10x and they received now 15y. In terms of country number 2, it lost 15y but gained 10x. Right? So it's going to have 5 more y than they used to. 5 more y than they used to. Each country is able to be outside of their frontier in terms of consumption. This is still permissible because they can't produce outside the frontier, but they can certainly consume outside of their frontier. Something that emerges as a result of free trade. Okay. One of the last things that I want to cover in this chapter, and I'm going to kind of combine this then just to minimize the number of videos that you have, some of the material that's in chapter 5, I believe, in terms of international trade. I want to cover a little bit about the circular flow diagram and looking at how goods and services are actually exchanged for money. Now, in terms of this circular flow diagram, what we say here is that there, at its very basic level, that there are households and firms, and that these firms, or that these households sell their labor, and that the firms obviously sell goods and services. For that labor, they pay wages. For these goods that are sold to them and services, households obviously have to pay for goods and services. Right? Now, in between all of this would then be the government, who has paid taxes from both categories, but who also pays money to each group as well, right? Pays money to households for benefits, for entitlement programs, but also gives like tax breaks and whatnot to businesses as well. So the circular flow diagram is at least helpful for us for understanding how money and goods and services flow in the economy. Now, the one last thing I want to cover for this chapter then, well actually not for this chapter, but the extension of this material that's in chapter 8 would be the arguments then that are presented in opposition to free trade. Right? So we said that in general free trade benefits all. But we certainly know, right, just looking at the arguments that are presented, that people are hurt by free trade. People lose their job. People get lower wages. So what tends to happen is that trade is restricted in one of two ways. Either with a tariff, which is a tax essentially on an imported good, a good that comes from some other place, or with a quota, where we say that you can only bring so much of that good into the country. So tariffs and quotas are the way that trade is restricted. Now, what would be the general arguments for why this is done? One of the ways, most popular ways would be to protect domestic jobs, to protect U.S. jobs. Another argument would be national defense, that obviously we don't want to be buying goods from countries that we might go to war with, right? We wouldn't want to buy, Iran, we wouldn't want to buy our bombers from Iran, right? Even if they were of very good quality. Another argument often given would be the infant industry argument. In the infant industry argument, there's actually some credibility, is that you'd actually want to help protect a domestic industry, promote its development by protecting it from foreign trade, lower prices and whatnot. And then, of those four major arguments, really the infant industry argument is about the only reasonable argument that economists would allow for a short period of time. All of the other arguments, national defense, maybe, but all the other arguments, you could basically say that if people are losing their job, what would an economist say here? That, essentially society would be better off if the benefits from free trade, if some of those benefits were basically then given to those who lose their job from free trade. And that's actually what happens. If you lose your job because of free trade in the U.S., you can then apply for extended unemployment and health benefits through the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, TAA. And it's basically paid for essentially out of the benefits that come from free trade. Okay, so in looking at that, then, what I want you to then focus on from those two chapters, then chapter 2 and then extending out to chapter 8, is this idea that the free trade benefits all principle is really just in terms of the production possibilities frontier. It's not an ethical statement. It's really more of a mathematical statement. Okay. I'm going to stop the video here then, and that will cover conclude our coverage of chapters 2 and of chapter 8.